There is a war happening right now inside you, and you don't even know you're losing it. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or gunfire. It happens in the quiet moment before you open your eyes in the morning, in the half-second between an insult and your reaction, in the space between what happens to you and what you decide it means. That space is the only battlefield that has ever mattered. And almost every human being who has ever lived has surrendered it without a fight. 2,000 years ago, a man who was born into slavery, whose leg was broken by his own master, who owned nothing, who was exiled from Rome by the whim of an emperor, sat down and taught free men how to live. His name was Epictetus. He had every reason to be broken. He had every excuse to be bitter. And yet he built, out of nothing but thought, a fortress no chain could touch. He said something that should be carved into the walls of every mind that wants to be free. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgment about things. Not the event. Not the loss. Not the failure. Not the cruel words of another man. Our opinion of it. That is the war. And that is the war you were born to fight. You have been told your whole life that the world is doing this to you. That the economy is doing this to you. That your family, your body, your circumstances, your bad luck, is doing this to you. And so you have handed over the one thing that was never meant to be handed over, your mind. You have made yourself a prisoner in a cell with an open door, because you never learned that the door was open the entire time. Somewhere out there, right now, a version of you is thriving in the exact same circumstances you are drowning in. Same economy, same broken heart, same empty bank account, same diagnosis. The difference between that version of you and the one reading, hearing these words right now is not talent. It is not luck. It is not privilege. It is command. Command over the one territory that was given to you at birth and can never be taken by force, your own mind. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor who ruled the known world, kept Epictetus' words close, because he understood something that most kings never grasp, that the throne means nothing if the man sitting on it cannot rule himself. And you do not need a throne to practice this. You need only the willingness to stop asking the world to change, and start asking yourself who you are choosing to be inside it. Thomas Edison understood this in the marrow of his bones. When his laboratory burned to the ground in 1914, decades of notes, prototypes, a lifetime of work reduced to ash in a single night, witnesses say he stood watching the flames with something close to wonder on his face. His son found him and expected to see a broken man. Instead, Edison said, "Thank God all our mistakes were burned up. Now we can start fresh." That is not denial. That is not delusion. That is a man who had already done the inner work Epictetus demanded. He had already separated the event from his judgment of the event, and in that separation, he found freedom instead of despair. The fire could take the building. It could not take the mind that built it in the first place. And that mind built something greater from the ashes. This is the discipline nobody teaches you in school, because it cannot be tested with a pencil and paper. It can only be tested by life itself again and again, in the moments that try to break you. Understand this clearly. Within your control are your thoughts, your judgments, your desires, your effort, your response. Outside of your control is almost everything else. Other people's opinions, the past, the actions of strangers, the outcome of your labor, the hour of your death. Nearly every ounce of suffering you have ever carried came from confusing these two categories. You have spent years grieving things you never owned in the first place, and neglecting the one thing that was always, fully, entirely yours. So ask yourself in this very moment, what have you been trying to control that was never yours to control? The opinion of a person who will never understand you? The outcome of a risk you have not yet had the courage to take? The timeline of a dream that refuses to move at the pace of your impatience? Let it go. Not because it doesn't matter. Let it go because your grip on it is the very thing suffocating your peace. Andrew Carnegie arrived in America with nothing. A poor immigrant boy from Scotland who worked as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill for a wage that could barely feed him. He did not control the ships that brought his family across the ocean in poverty. He did not control the class he was born into, the accent that marked him as an outsider, the doors that were closed to boys like him. But he controlled his mind. He controlled what he studied in the hours others spent sleeping. He controlled the discipline of saving what little he had. He controlled the belief that his circumstances were a starting line, not a life sentence. And from a bobbin boy, he built an empire of steel that reshaped a nation. Every ounce of that empire was built first in the territory Epictetus described, the mind that refuses to be a slave to circumstance. You are not your circumstances. You are not your past failures. You are not the opinion someone formed of you in a moment when they didn't even know your name. You are the awareness underneath all of it, the one thing that has been watching your entire life unfold, untouched by any of it unless you allow it to be touched. This is where clarity is born. Not from chasing every ambition that flickers across your mind like light on water, but from sitting still long enough to ask what actually matters, and what is merely noise dressed up as urgency. Vision without clarity is a ship without a compass. It will move, it will burn fuel, it will exhaust you, and it will arrive nowhere. Clarity is the discipline of knowing with total certainty what you are building and why, so that when the storm comes, and it will come, you are not asking whether to continue, only how. Walt Disney was told no more times than most men are told yes in an entire lifetime. He was fired from a newspaper for lacking imagination. His first animation studio went bankrupt. Bankers laughed him out of rooms when he pitched a full-length animated film, calling it Disney's folly, certain it would ruin him. He mortgaged his own house to finish Snow White. Every external signal told him to stop, to shrink, to accept the world's verdict on his vision. He didn't listen because the vision wasn't coming from the external world in the first place. It was coming from a place inside him that no banker's laughter could reach. That is purpose. Not a feeling that visits you on your best days, but a fire you protect on your worst ones. And purpose without discipline is nothing but a beautiful daydream. Discipline is what happens after the motivation leaves the room, and it always leaves the room. Discipline is showing up on the morning you don't feel like it, doing the work no one is watching, keeping the promise you made to yourself when nobody would have known if you broke it. Epictetus did not teach comfort. He taught training, the same word used for the conditioning of an athlete's body, applied instead to the conditioning of the will. You do not simply decide once to be strong and remain strong forever. You train the mind the way a blacksmith trains iron, through repeated fire, repeated pressure, repeated deliberate discomfort, until what was once soft becomes something that can hold an edge. Abraham Lincoln failed in business. He lost election after election. He suffered depression so consuming that friends removed knives from his house, fearing what his own mind might do to him. And still he rose, term after term, defeat after defeat, because inside him was a discipline that did not require the world's permission to keep moving. When he finally reached the presidency, he inherited a nation tearing itself apart, and he held it together not with ease, but with a will that had been forged in decades of private suffering nobody applauded. Every great structure you admire in this world was built by someone who kept working long after the applause stopped, or before it ever started. Then comes action, because philosophy that never turns into behavior is just entertainment for the mind. Epictetus was ruthless about this. He said you must not merely say you are a philosopher, but demonstrate it in your actions, because words are cheap and available to any man with a mouth, but discipline of the hands is available only to those who have done the harder work first inside the head. Every day you delay turning belief into motion, you are teaching your own mind that your word means nothing. And a mind that cannot trust itself will always be timid, always be small, always retreat at the first sign of resistance. Henry Ford was told the automobile was a rich man's toy, a passing novelty. He rebuilt his company from failure twice before the world ever knew his name. He said that whether you think you can or think you cannot, you are right, not as a slogan for a poster, but as an observation about how belief becomes the architecture of possibility itself. Your mind does not simply witness your life. It constructs it, decision by decision, judgment by judgment, response by response. And through every failure, every fire, every closed door, there must be gratitude. Not the soft, performative kind, but the fierce, disciplined kind that Epictetus demanded. Gratitude for what you have instead of grief for what you lack. Gratitude that turns a broken leg into a philosophy that would outlive empires. Gratitude that looks at ashes and sees a clean beginning instead of an ending. This gratitude is not weakness. It is the sharpest form of strength there is, Because it refuses to let circumstance dictate the content of your soul. Adapt like water finds its way around stone, not because it is weak, but because it understands that rigidity breaks and flexibility endures. Every plan you make will meet resistance you did not predict. The rigid mind shatters against that resistance. The trained mind bends, adjusts, learns, and keeps moving toward the same unshakable purpose through a different route. This is not compromise of your values. This is wisdom in the application of them. And resilience is not the absence of pain, it is motion in spite of it. Every person you have ever admired was broken at some point in ways the history books rarely dwell on. What separated them was not that they avoided the breaking. It was that they refused to remain broken. They stood back up, not because it stopped hurting, but because they understood in the deepest chamber of their being that the pain was outside their control and what they did next was not. Learning never stops for the mind that intends to master itself. The moment you believe you have arrived is the moment you begin to decay. Epictetus taught his students for years, not because philosophy was a subject to complete, but because the self is a discipline with no finish line, only deeper levels of mastery waiting to be earned. So here is the truth this entire journey has been circling. Your mind is either your kingdom or your prison, and you are the only one who decides which. Every excuse you have ever made was a small surrender of the throne. Every time you blamed the world for what only your own judgment could create, you handed your crown to circumstance. That ends now. Not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not when the fear subsides on its own. Now, in this exact moment, with the same broken pieces and unfinished dreams you walked in with. Somewhere inside you is the same fire that stood in Edison's ashes and called it a fresh start. The same will that held Lincoln upright through despair the world never saw. The same clarity that let a poor immigrant boy build an empire from nothing but discipline and vision. That fire has never left you. It has only been waiting patiently for you to stop asking the world for permission and finally, take command. Control your mind or it will control you. There is no third option and there never was. The choice was always yours. It still is. What will you choose the moment you finish hearing these words?